curriculum that we're talking about today in this webinar. So BSCS Middle School Science came from a grant from this particular national program. And our goals for the project are on your screen now, and I'm not going to read them to you, but you can just skim through those and see what it was we were trying to do when we were working on this project to develop the curriculum. So this particular piece of a curriculum comes in a larger plan for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And originally we called this 8th grade science, but we learned very quickly that to be usable for teachers, it kind of needed to span that whole grade band from 6 to 7 and from 7 to 8. So when you see that in a couple of these slides, know that that's what we originally started with, but we ended with just a middle school curriculum. In fact, it was field tested in both 7th and 8th grade, and field tested very well. This is that 8th grade piece enlarged a little bit so you can see the science concepts that are addressed in each of the units for this particular piece of curriculum. You'll notice that throughout each one of those you see a theme of energy, and indeed that's exactly what we were trying to do. We were trying to keep a theme of energy and systems thinking throughout each one of the chapters and the units within this curriculum. So the teachers and the students that field tested this curriculum came from 12 states across the country. There were a mix of urban, rural, and suburban districts. There were 13% were private schools and the rest were public schools. So the majority were public schools that field tested the curriculum. We actually had 2 field tests. So this is a sum of all of that. And then we had a range. We had some schools that had as low as 2% of underrepresented groups to schools that were 100% minority students or others, and the average was about 50%. There was a range of teaching experience with field test teachers. Some were pretty new at teaching, and some were veteran teachers that had up to 37 years teaching experience. What we wanted to test when we field tested this curriculum were these features of the curriculum materials. 6 of those features were mainly aimed at students, and then the last one was for teachers. And I'm going to take you through a little brief discussion, I guess, or I'll just give you some information for each of these features, what they were, what we were looking for, and how they tested when we had reviewers. And this is the way those particular features were reviewed. We had external reviewers, external to BSCS, so they were in universities, some were teachers, most were PhDs, some were scientists, all of them had expertise in the fields for the feature we were testing. We also did a lot of classroom observations. Those of us working on the projects would go and visit the classrooms, watch the enactment of the curriculum, watch how the teachers were responding, watch how the students were responding, and spent a lot of time taking very detailed field notes and filling out rubrics, all kinds of things. And then the teachers did surveys after each activity and told us what went right, what went wrong, what they felt were things that were very helpful, what were not so helpful. So we used that information to do revisions on the curriculum. So the first feature was enhancing rigor, coherence, and focus. And this is one example of how we do that. And for each chapter, we give a chapter organizer, and you'll see that this kind of lays out the chapter so you can see what comes first, what you end with, the major concepts we're trying to address within the chapter, the key ideas in each lesson. And so this would represent one chapter. So you can see that there's in each chapter, all the chapters of the whole curriculum, there's a dominant theme of inquiry. Energy and systems, like I said before, are kind of a unifying concept within each one of these. And these chapter organizers kind of help students see where they've been, where they're going, teachers as well. And we'll look at a version of this that is in the teacher materials. You'll see the difference in those. This particular chapter is in the Science and Society unit, and you'll see that talking a lot about energy balance in humans. So when we evaluated that particular feature, we gave, like I said before, we had teacher surveys and external reviewers, and in both of those they rated it very high, that it was highly coherent, had high coherence from both of those reviewers, both of those sets of reviewers. The second feature that we tested was the effectiveness of the BSCS 5E instructional model, and some of you may be very familiar with that. It was born in BSCS back in the 80s. It's an instructional sequence, an instructional strategy that sequences things, the activities of the chapter through engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. And there is one cycle of this instructional model in each chapter. So when we had external reviewers review how well we stuck to that instructional model, it came out pretty high on the continuum there, which is good. Since it is BSCS, we should hope that we do a pretty good job of sticking with the model. The third feature was a comprehensive assessment package. So that's built in all the way through the chapters. Here's just two examples of how the assessment is built in. We'll see a little bit more about that when we look at the teacher materials. There's reflect and connect questions at the end of each activity that ask students to reflect on what they've learned, connect it to some everyday part of their everyday life, and usually, almost always, record that in their science notebooks. We really push the use of science notebooks. And then the evaluate activity, the fifth activity, the last one in the 5E sequence, is always our idea of a type of summative assessment for the chapter. And in this particular evaluate, it comes again from the Science and Society unit, and they've been talking about energy in, energy out of the human body, and one of the complications when some of that gets out of balance is type 2 diabetes. And this evaluate is where the students are going to plan a day, a diabetes awareness day. And it was interesting in the field test where there was one school, their kids really got into doing that, and they actually hosted a diabetes awareness day in their school. So in that comprehensive assessment package, this is the way the teachers and the external reviewers evaluated that particular feature of the curriculum. Feature 4 was we wanted to be sure we use metacognitive strategies. From how people learn, we know that is some of the research tells us that students need to become metacognitive. They need to think about their thinking. And one of the ways we do that in science notebooks is to have them record lots of stuff in their science notebooks, but we also give them opportunities to go back to what they've written and to revise it when they learn more from either more things that they've done within the chapter, or they learn it from their peers. So you can see how this student started off with some ideas and has then changed them and used a different color pen or pencil. We ask them to do that every time. That's one of the strategies we use, so that the students can see how their ideas are changing, and also so the teachers can see. Here's an example of how that is built into the curriculum. This comes from the Sciences Inquiry chapter that we like to suggest to begin the year with, and they start off answering the question, what is science? And then they do some things, and then they answer that question again. In fact, they return to that question several times. And if you'll notice in the second part of that question, it asks, well, how have your ideas changed? And then what made your ideas change? What did you do that changed your mind a little bit, so that the students are thinking about their thinking, being metacognitive. So in the teacher surveys, this is how we surveyed the teachers only on this metacognitive strategies, and this is the results from those surveys. You know, we were looking at how students were metacognitive, and we found out it really depended on the importance that the teacher put on those types of questions. We unfortunately found that those were the types of questions oftentimes teachers would skip, and I know that's because time. It's a reality of what I can get done in the classroom, and those questions tend to be the ones that get skipped. We try to build in many literacy and sense-making strategies within the curriculum. And here's an example of one that is in, again, not the life science, but the Science and Society unit. You may recognize that picture on the left. You may have done that in your classroom. That's a model of a lung. There's two balloons in there to represent the lobes of the lung. There's the plastic thing on the bottom, or rubber thing on the bottom, that represents the diaphragm. And a lot of times I was a classroom teacher for 16 years, so I know that a lot of times I would find these really cool things to do in class, and we'd do it, and the kids would get all excited, and then I'd start asking them some questions, and it was just a real cool, exciting thing to do. They had trouble making the connection from what we were doing to what it represented, what science ideas it represented. So this particular strategy that you see on the right is called an analogy map. And we try to build those in when we use an analogy or a model, that we want to make sure students, excuse me, students understand the connection. And you'll see how this student in their notebook filled out the analogy map for this particular model. So these literacy strategies, another one that we used is an explanation template. So this is a strategy to help students kind of organize everything they're learning so that they can write a scientific explanation. And this particular student was trying to explain, why do you breathe faster or deeper when you exercise? So that they made some evidence, listed some evidence, made some observations, and then they wrote their reasoning, and then the claim and explanation. I'll give you a few minutes to read that. This is an 8th grade student, and they did pretty good, I think. So that's feature 5, the literacy and sense-making strategies. This is how the teachers and the external reviewers rated our ability to use those strategies effectively in the curriculum. Feature 6 is collaborative learning. One of the strategies we use in collaborative learning is the consider, contribute, consult, revise strategy. This one is very similar to a turn and talk strategy, but it's got a couple of extra features to it that help in classroom management, as well as having students actually discuss what you want them to discuss. Excuse me. What we know about teamwork skills is that students need to reflect on those teamwork skills. So built into the curriculum, we have some questions that ask students to reflect on how they did. How did they do at this particular teamwork skill that we were practicing in this activity? In this one, the example here was sharing responsibility. So the question says, how did you do? What was one thing you did good, and share one way you could improve? Seems like kind kind of easy questions, and the kids kind of go, "Oh, these are easy questions," but it makes them aware that they're actually trying to develop those teamwork skills, and this will really help in classroom management if you promote this early in the year, and they know you're going to hold them accountable for these teamwork skills. So when we had this evaluated in the curriculum, the teachers and the external reviewers rated it very high. So based on the teacher surveys, the external reviews, and all those classroom observations that we did, we found that these key features that were related to students were found to be very usable, very feasible for students and teachers. And in several chapters, we made revisions based on that feedback from the external reviewers to keep improving. We're always trying to improve it and build on it. So, did the students learn? I mean, it's all good to know that we did what we said we were going to do, and we had all these evaluations to know that. But did the students learn in these units? So you'll see this graph here along the bottom. The ES, that's Earth Science, Life Science, Physical Science, and Science and Society. You'll see that these are from the second field test that students showed an improvement between a pre-test and a post-test for each of those units. The blue bars represents the average pre-test score, and the red bar represents the post-test score. So it's important to realize that all students showed gains when using the unit. So what about those underrepresented groups? This graph shows the gain made between the pre and the post test for different groups of students. Looking specifically at the Earth Science unit, just pulled one out, we can see that students made gains between the pre-test and the post-test. And the first blue bar shows the gains made by male students, and the red bar shows the gains made by female students. And so you can see the females made even greater gains than the males did in that pre-post test. And you look at the rest of the graph, you can see the pattern also fits for minority students, students of low socioeconomic status, and then for students that were English language learners, we can see that they made gains equivalent to those of native English speakers. And we have graphs that are similar for this one for each of the other units as well. So what does this curriculum look like? I know you didn't come to hear all that spiel, I hope you're interested in it, but what does it look like? What does it look like in a classroom? So we're going to take a minute to look at this particular curriculum, how it looks online. I'm going to go to this particular website, and hang on just a minute, I've got to do a screen change. Dana, are you seeing the right screen? Is anybody seeing the right screen?
Yes, Betty, it looks great.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So this is, excuse me, the site, and I'd like to give you a little tour of the program. After I get something to drink, my throat's getting dry. So this particular program is online, like we said, and it's free. And we ask that you have your students complete a pre and post test, and I'll show you a little bit about that as well. So this is what the site looks like. Here are the units down on the left-hand side. The Sciences Inquiry is actually just one chapter. The Life Science unit, Earth Science unit, both of those have 4 chapters. The Physical Science unit has 3 chapters. And the Science and Society unit has 4 chapters as well. So all the chapters are up there. You can also, on the right-hand side, see that you can print out a chapter PDF if you want. If you need something in your hand, I would probably have to do that as well. So what we're going to do is to take a little bit of time and look at the Physical Science unit, and we'll also look at pieces of that particular unit, the chapters and some of the activities within that unit. So on chapter 3, we'll take a look. Well, let's first look at the unit opener. In the unit opener, every unit has one of these. There'll be the just a little bit of text that will kind of get you introduced to that particular unit and give you some goals for the unit. You'll notice down at the bottom of that page, you'll learn about, it says you'll learn about energy, and you'll understand that energy is transferred, transformed, and is not created or used up. Some big key concepts for understanding energy. So also, I think every one of the units has a unit engage, and where it's some activity where students do a little quick thing to get their minds around what they're going to be studying within that unit. So let's look at chapter 3, electrical connections. Well, just take a look at those 3 chapters in the physical science unit. You'll see what, if you will, forms of energy are addressed in those particular chapters. In chapter 3, the unit ends with electrical connections. So once you click on a chapter, you'll see down underneath here a set of other links that will take you to different parts of the chapter. And right here is the pretest. Every chapter will have a pretest. And so if you're using this curriculum in your classroom, what we want to do, we want to learn from your students and your implementation. So we want to gather that information. We want to know if students are still learning. So once you click on that, you'll get a pretest. It's done online, so it would be, you'd have to either have, every student would have to have a laptop, or you visit a computer lab to take this pretest and the post-test. And there's some information there that once you sign up for using the program, to use the program, you'll be given this information on how do you, what is this identification number and that kind of thing. So the chapter organizer you've seen earlier. So this is the organizer for this particular chapter. You'll see again that it's got the 5E model, the cycle there for the instructional model. In the middle, major concepts that are addressed within that chapter, the key idea for each activity, and the linking question. How does the engage connect to the explore? It's not just 5 different activities you're going to do in this particular chapter. They're connected in a very real way that we hope is pretty obvious to you and your students. So one thing that I know some teachers are concerned about with online materials is how do students, where do they get this hands-on experience, these labs? It's not hands-on the computer all the time. So I want to assure you that this curriculum has a lot of hands-on lab activities built in. And let's take a look. We'll just go to the elaborate activity in this chapter. And this elaborate is about generating electrical energy. So they've figured out what, about circuits, and they understand about how a battery keeps those electrons moving and generating electric current. And then the elaborate, they're looking at, okay, so how do you generate electrical energy? And so this particular lab, or this particular activity, if you'll look on the left-hand side, you'll see there are 4 stations that they'll go through. So they're actually in the lab moving around, manipulating equipment and learning from that. And I'll give you a little peek at that so you can see that it's not completely different. It's not all online. Yeah, the curriculum is all online, but what they do is not necessarily all online. So they're still using a science notebook. They've got to prepare the notebook. They're getting things ready for these stations. And I know from teaching experience, if you get a classroom full of middle school students and you turn them loose in the lab with stations, it can be a management nightmare. They can also, they go crazy. So one of the strategies we use in the curriculum is to try to give the students and the teachers a focus question so that they have, okay, why are we doing this activity? Well, we're doing this activity, we're doing this station so that we can answer this question. And for this, elaborate, the focus question is, what energy transformations are involved in producing electrical energy? Those energy transformations will differ a little bit at each station. So when they go to station 1, this station, they're using a magnet through a coil of wire and generating an electric current. So you can see that this is not done on a computer. We do have some computer animations to help them visualize some things they can't necessarily see in the lab, but they are still using science equipment. They're still manipulating things and working through labs during their science class. So the first station is about generating electric current with a magnet and a coil of wire. Station 2 is a fruit battery, and it's connected actually to batteries so that they don't think that they can run everything on a lemon. And then in station 3, they actually build a thermocouple. In station 4, they're using solar cells. So they're doing quite a bit of lab activity just in this elaborate. Once they finish all 4 stations, this is what they do. They take some time to kind of review what they've done. They've actually created several flow charts to represent those energy transfers and transformations within that particular station. And this is one of the collaborative activities that we have. Once they've done that, in 4C it asks them to review a classmate's science notebook and to give them some feedback. So they use sticky notes to look through those stations, and maybe their picture doesn't necessarily make sense to that student, or maybe their description doesn't, so they're giving them some feedback on sticky notes. And then in 4D they get their science notebook back and make some revisions, and you notice we suggest that they make those revisions in a different color as well. And then, you know, if they need to talk, what did you mean by this? They can go back and talk with their classmates to better understand what they were asking them to do or confused about or whatever. So in each, like I said earlier, after each E, if you will, there are some reflect and connect questions. And you'll see one of the things that we heard from students, you know, when we would visit the classroom, one of the questions I would ask was, you know, what did you find that was different about this curriculum than others than you? And a lot of kids would say, you know, at the end of the chapter or the end of the activity, I can't just go back and find the answers for all those questions. I have to really think. And so where that was a little frustrating to some kids, it was empowering to most, because they thought, you know, anybody can go back and just regurgitate what's written in a textbook. But when you really have to think about what you're doing, and answer some questions that make you reflect on what you're learning, those sometimes are a little tougher, but they also kind of respect the fact that these kids can really think. So there's an example of some of those types of questions that come at the end of that particular elaborate. And I wanted to share just a little bit about that evaluate, the build a better light bulb. In this particular activity and in this particular evaluate, it kind of assesses the whole unit, because the kids actually do build a light bulb and they have to trace the flow of energy. Well, if you remember, the first chapter in this physical science unit was about heat. The second chapter was about light, and now they're building a light bulb. So they're going to have electrical energy because they're using a battery and they've got wires. It's going to heat up, the filament's going to heat up, and it's going to produce light. So it evaluates actually all 3 chapters, which is kind of nice. And then over on the left, you'll see the chapter 3, there's the post-test. So we would ask that students take the post-test after they've completed that complete chapter. And then there's a map that I'll just click on it so you can see it's got everything within the chapter. if you were like, oh, I can't remember where that was, if I could just see it all together, I can go back and find it. This will be helpful because all of these are links. They're not just a printout. So that's the student version of the curriculum, and I want to take a little bit of time. Let me switch screens here and share with you what we have for teachers. So the teacher materials are housed here on this site, and we call it CCS, and that stands for the Curriculum Customization Service. So everything we wrote for teachers is here, and there's also the possibility for you to add more resources that you might find useful for teaching this. And I'll just, okay, so I'm going to look at the, I was trying to get back to the beginning here. This has got all the chapters that we looked at before that you saw in the student work. And we're going to go ahead and keep the same theme of that same chapter we were looking at in the physical science unit, the third chapter called electrical connections. And yeah, here we go. Let me log in again. It is password protected, so your students can't just hop in there anytime they want. And if you leave it idle for too long, it makes you log in again. So this is the physical science unit, as it says up here at the top, and energy in, energy out, and then illuminating light is the chapter. And if you look over on the right, you'll see the 3 tabs for those 3 chapters in that unit. So if you look at the CCS site, remember that's Curriculum Customization Service, you'll see there's an introduction piece. So I'm going to click on that and let you see what is there. All of these E's, if you will, are set up the same way, and we'll look at it a little bit, how they're a little bit different from the introduction. But there's tabs across the top, and then there's links underneath each tab. Probably most of your time will be spent in this first tab where it just says BSCS Middle School Science. This particular link, if you click it, you're going to get the whole student edition of that chapter. So the PDF of that pops up, and you can either just look at it online if you want to see how the teacher instructions compare to what the students are instructed to do. You can do that pretty easily, either by printing it out or looking at it online. So you'll see across the top interactive resources. Those have some extra things that are not technically part of the curriculum, but you might find useful to use in your classroom. Standards, will be upgrading that or updating that to the new generation science standards once those are officially out. But right now it contains the links to the national science standards that were the predecessor of the new generation science standards. And then you'll see these 2 tabs, My Stuff for this concept and Shared Stuff for this concept. The same things are underneath here as links. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's the customization piece of this site that I think you'll find very nice. The instructional support materials down here, I'm going to click on that, and you'll see there's links to everything that would come if, let's say, you were using a textbook, and you have all this teacher material before each chapter that would give you like background information, what the chapter assumes the students kind of already know for prerequisite knowledge, different assessment tools, all the copy masters that go with it. So that's all in this introduction piece. I'm going to click on this chapter organizer and let you see how it's a little bit different from the student version. You'll notice in the boxes for each E, the teacher version includes a summary of the activity. That's not there for the students. Let's see, the assessment opportunities. When I was talking about the features of the program, one of the things that we had it reviewed for was how well these embedded assessments, how well we did that. And this actually came from some teacher input we got. They said, you know, there's lots of great assessments, but there's also a lot of collaborative work, and I'm struggling with knowing what I can use as an individual assessment for students. And so what we did was to put together a table and look at each E within the chapter and pick out either a step in the process and procedure or a question that comes at the end that we thought, you know, this is a crux question. This is a question that if the student, you know, answers fully, the teacher can really learn a lot from about what that student knows as a formative assessment, or later on in the chapter in the evaluate as a summative assessment. So that's what this table is for, is to help you kind of pick out those questions that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. Let's see. I think that's all I wanted to share on that. Let's go to one of the the E's. Let's look at the elaborate, because that's the one we were looking at in the student materials. So you see, it looks very familiar as it would it looks the same as that introduction piece, except that in this list there's one other thing in there, or a couple other things. The teaching tips are in there. So if you were using if you were doing the elaborate activity and you clicked on the instructional support, so you're going to get an overview for that activity. Let me click on that, and you'll see it gives all your materials that you need for that. It's going to tell you what you need to do to prep this 4-station lab in advance, what you need to have. And so it gives you a lot of good information for that, along with a few sentences about what the activity is. In addition, always in the instructional support materials for each E, there is the tab or the link that'll take you to the outcomes and indicators. And if you're required, like for your lesson plans, I know I always had to list my objectives for that day to turn in to the central office or to the principal or whatever. So you can use this. I mean, that's our objectives for that particular activity. What are the outcomes we want by the end of the activity, and what will students do to indicate that they have met that outcome? So the numbered sentences here are the outcomes, and the bulleted list are what the students are going to be doing, how they will demonstrate how they have met that outcome. So those are there for every single E. And then the teaching tips, which is the part that's not in the introduction, will take you through each particular activity in detail. And a beginning teacher, first time you use the curriculum, this will be your Bible. And then after that, you'll just kind of be used to it and maybe not use it as much. But initially, you'll really want to pay attention to this. We always give some suggestion to how to get the day started. Not the chapter, not the lesson, but that 50-minute class period when you come in. What do you do? After you take roll, how do you get the kids hooked in to the science activity of the day? And then where students have step-by-step process and procedure instructions, you've got step-by-step support for those. What are students going to be doing? What do you need to watch for? What are some questions you might ask? I don't know if this one has it or not. Not this one doesn't. But if one of the process and procedure steps ask the students to participate in a class discussion, then your instruction here may give you some example questions to ask students to get that discussion going, and what kind of main ideas are supposed to come out of that discussion. So this is very helpful, and teachers have responded very well to this and think that these are very essential to have. So each station here is got the steps in it, answers to the questions that are asked after each station. So there's a lot of support in the teaching tips piece of the curriculum. So the CCS, like I said before, is Curriculum Customization Service. So how do you customize it? Well, in the My Stuff and the Shared Stuff, that's where you would customize this. Let's say you created a PowerPoint, or you found a lab, or you had a lab that you've always done that you think would be helpful for those students maybe that are struggling with the concept. Maybe they need something else. Or maybe you've got some kids that are really sharp and they flew through that activity like crazy and they need something else. So you have some extensions that you want to kind of keep track of. Well, you can save them all on this site and keep it all together. So the My Stuff, obviously there's nothing here for me because I haven't saved anything, but you can upload files like a PowerPoint. Maybe you've made a short quiz and you want to upload that. Keep it all together. Maybe you found a website that is extremely helpful, has a great animation or has a great movie clip that really illustrates the point very well. So you might want to add a link here and it'll keep it all together. And if you can rate it, you can say, hey, this goes with, this will really help step 4 and 5 of the process and procedure go a lot smoother. Or maybe you did a little revising to make it fit better with your classroom, and you think, hey, I know somebody at this other school that's using this same curriculum, would be helpful. You can share it. So this shared stuff, not anything in there right now, but you can share anything. You can keep it private if you want to, or if you want to share some things you've done with this curriculum with other teachers that are teaching the same curriculum, you can. So they can access anything you want to make public. So that gives you a really fast and furious tour of both the student materials and the teacher materials for this program. And Dana, I think now if there's some questions, we should open it up for question and answer time.
Great. Thanks, Betty. We have a few questions that have come up. The first, Steve asked that we return on your PowerPoint to that last metacognitive slide. I think it was strategy 4.
But I can do that.
And I think Steve had a specific about
Feature
that, or we just wanted to look at something.
Okay, wait a minute. Feature 4. Yeah, there we go. Is this?
Steve, do you have a specific question? Oh, the one before that.
There you go.
There.
So, Dana, are we going to make this available? Will teachers be able to access this PowerPoint if they want to use see it and spend a little more time looking at some of the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
We can make this available. Steve, is this the correct slide? Okay. He's got a question on this slide. Steve, while you're typing that question, I'm going to ask Betty to answer another question that came up. Betty, can you speak a little bit to the audience in terms of the grade level that this program was created for?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I said earlier, we initially started off writing the curriculum for 8th grade. And then it became pretty apparent to us that that was pretty limiting. For one thing, maybe you're a 7th grade teacher and you teach life science. Can you just use the life science unit? And the answer to that is yes. It was field tested mainly in 8th grade. We had some field tests, several students and teacher field tests that were 7th graders, and it field tested very well in that grade level as well. We haven't field tested it ever in 6th grade. So you'd have to look at that and make sure if you were had 6th grade students, if it was appropriate for that age level. So once we figured out that it's not good it wouldn't be good just to make this just for 8th grade, we tried to pay a closer attention to reading level. So we tried to keep the reading level around 6th grade. And the activity engagements, they're really high, because we know middle school students have to have that, or you lose them real quickly in classrooms. So short answer, it was field tested mainly in 8th grade, some in 7th grade. We feel like that it's appropriate for any level of middle school. I have to give a little caveat there. It has not been tested in 6th grade.
Okay, back to the metacognitive strategies slide. Steve was asking for a clarification on the use of metacognition. He says specifically, as middle schoolers are often resistant to self-reflection and re-examining their work.
So yeah, we ran into that. I mean, were you one of our field test teachers? Because we really, the first field test, one thing that we were a little surprised about is how much resistance there was to the reflection and revising of work. So you're spot on with that. And what we've tried to do is to build in, especially in the teacher support materials, but also in the student materials, why this is important. I mean, students are going to be in science classes for maybe just through high school, and they're going to be needing to reflect on their thinking all their life. And so that kind of thing, the teamwork skills, those kinds of extra things added that aren't just necessarily science content, sometimes get lost in the work that's done in the classroom, and we try to promote that importance. So how do we address it? Well, we build it in. We don't try not to say, oh, teachers, it's important to have your students be metacognitive. We actually write steps like this that have kids do that explicitly. And so what we found, and I think that's the second slide, is that a lot of times it got skipped, and I think it's because exactly what Steve is saying is that students are very resistant to that, and sometimes you got to pick your battles in class. And while we think that's a very important battle to pick, it wasn't always the battle that our field test teachers picked to fight, to make sure that students did those particular questions, answered those questions, really thought deeply about how their thinking has changed. But we keep putting it in there because we know one of the 3 key findings from How People Learn, that research, is that students have got to be learners, not just students, learners of all kinds have got to be metacognitive and really think about their thinking and how that thinking has changed. I'm not sure I answered your question. I sure did ramble a lot if I didn't.
Okay, we'll go to the next question here. The chapter as a whole is presented in a 5E format, but are the lessons also structured in the 5E way?
That's a good question. No, they're not. The lessons, what we know about conceptual understanding is that it is very difficult to get through and develop a concept in one single classroom, and that's what the 5E instructional model was designed to do, is for conceptual understanding. And to get to that point, it takes time. So I know there's a push in some states, and there are some misunderstandings about the 5E model, in that it is best done in a classroom. You should get through all 5Es within a classroom, but that's not what it was designed to do. That's not the way we intend for it to be used. But oftentimes the engage is one class period, maybe even half a class period. Sometimes the explain might be multiple class periods, so it takes time to get through those. However, we know that every single day you have to engage your students. And so that, if you'll recall back to that little getting started piece that I was talking about, that, if you will, would be the class time version of an engage. And you may cycle through a form of each E within a class period, but to use it for conceptual understanding, use it being the instructional model, for conceptual understanding, conceptual change, it's going to take longer than a class period.
Okay, thank you. The next question, there are actually two questions here that I think I will answer. The first was a request from one of our participants for a 4 to 6 slide PowerPoint that would be kind of for the stakeholders. And that is definitely something that we can work on setting up. I really appreciate that idea, and we will post something to the website as soon as possible for that. So I've made some notes here, and we'll work on that. And then the second question, and Steve, you mentioned that we did answer your question, but I just want to explain this a little bit more. Steve asked, is the content password protected, or are we encouraging students to go online and get the information themselves? All of this content is password protected. However, we will provide only one login for the teacher and one login for all students. This curriculum is not currently designed with anything that does has any tracking built in for having students do anything online that the teacher would grade, or any of that level of online interaction. And so we're providing one login so that you don't have to manage an entire classroom set of logins at this time. So you'll receive two logins, one that will let you access the eLearn site, and one that will let you access the CCS site, so the teacher materials, and then one that the students will be able to access the student materials. And we will send custom logins to you if you request to use the program. The next question, Betty, is are misconceptions addressed in the teacher tips?
Yes, that's a good question. In fact, we could just maybe even go there. Let me show you. It's like show and tell, right? So we're in this elaborate activity that we looked at kind of a little more detail in the physical science unit. And let me make sure so in the instructional materials, let's keep looking. Oh, okay, never mind. I know where it is now. It's in this introduction to the whole unit. It's not by chapter, it's by unit. So I'm trying to go there, and I'm not getting there. What am I doing wrong, Dana?
I'm trying to see here.
Maybe I can just, there we go. I just go back and trace my steps. So in the instructional support materials, let's just see. I'm looking. I'm not finding it. Why am I not finding it? I know it's here. Okay, so let's just go, there we go. We have to go to this page. Maybe.
Student conceptions down at the bottom?
Yeah.
What you're looking for?
I'm looking, but I'm not finding it. Where? Where are you?
Down at the very bottom? Down below all of the links. Go back down to the bottom of the page, Betty.
Hello. It's a new link. Sorry. Okay, so Betty's found it. Sorry about that. But the commonly held misconceptions for each chapter, there's a link there that will give some common misconception and then an explanation of that misconception, the scientifically accurate explanation. Not that that's what you want to use as a discussion or lecture topic, but many of the activities in the chapter are designed to bring out and dispel those misconceptions.
Okay. Next question, I think, Betty, you and I will probably kind of be able to answer together, so jump in here. Any plan for continuous update, looking at physical science, motion, matter, waves from NRC framework are missing? Haven't seen enough from Life, Earth, and Engineering to check.
So yes, remember in the whole framework that we were working for, this was just one piece out of the whole middle school group of standards, if you will. At that at that time we were working on the national science standards. But absolutely, I mean, we want to make this a complete program, and you're right, it's actually not complete at this point, but would be very useful for one grade or a piece of several grades throughout middle school. It's not going to cover them all because it's just one piece of the pie. But right now, that's all we have developed.
And just to add to that, that's part of the reason that we've made this program available, kind of with the requirement that teachers provide feedback. We want this to be a continual a work in. We want it to be something that you can use now, but also a work in progress. So we will continue to update it and continue to do additional development, and that will all come from the feedback that we receive from teachers and students. Okay, we have another question. Are the linking questions considered essential questions? Does the support documentation distinguish between knowledge and skills for each unit?
So let me address that first one about the linking questions. No, those would not necessarily be considered essential questions, and I'm thinking you're probably using that the same way understanding by design curriculum support is using that term as well. Those are just questions that would link one activity to the other. To answer that question, you would see the link between those. They may be essential questions, but they were not designed to be that type of question. We did design this curriculum using understanding by design. So we had enduring understandings, essential questions, and that kind of thing in the development process. And some of that is distinguished in the teacher materials.
Okay. We have any other questions?
So one thing I wanted to add before we go, Dana, is that any of the participants can contact either me or you or info@bscs.org to ask additional questions. And I didn't mention that paper that you posted to the Adobe Connect site. It's got the research findings from our work, much of what I described earlier, a few more details. If you wanted to download that, you can get it there or on our website.